Okay, terrific. We're going to start it again. So Daniel Katz and I followed the Supreme Court cases and tried to analyze them using different data points. So I'm going to present a presentation on focusing on the IP cases, and Dan will talk about some of the sophisticated analysis that he's been doing for several years now. And this is a empirical study that we've started last year and are continuing on this year. We're going to look at 4 key questions from this past term in terms of only the 5 IP cases. And these are the 4. If you turn to page 30 of the conference program, you could follow along in these slides. We're going to go through them rather quickly because we don't have that much time, and we want to keep this conference on time so that people can leave, especially if they're on trains. Okay. So for the first issue, what we looked at was just simply the reversal rate. How often did the Supreme Court reverse the Court of Appeals decisions? Last term, it was 60%, which actually is an improvement over the previous year, in which it was 80% reversal of dealing with 10 cases. So that is actually positive. How about unanimity of the court? 9-0 decisions or 8-0 decisions. It went down a lot this past term. Only one case was unanimous decision, and that was the last case that we just, it was the tacking case, the first case that we discussed at this conference. And that is down a lot from the year previous, in which there were 10 cases and 80% of them were unanimous. The next issue we looked at is in terms of voting alignments. How often do pairs of justices vote together? One surprising fact is that the 4 liberal justices, and then Breyer was recused in one case, plus Kennedy voted in all of the majority decisions. The 5 cases, they were always on the right side, the side that was in the majority. And the conservative justices were all over the map, very fragmented. Thomas was in 3 dissents, Alito, Roberts, Scalia in 2 dissents. And if you look at these numbers more closely, and sorry there were numbers, I know lawyers don't like numbers, but it turns out Justice Thomas and Scalia voted together only in 40% of the cases, and Justice Scalia and Alito voted only in 20% or one of the cases. So I just found that to be really surprising that the conservative justices were not cohesive as a group in these IP cases, and the liberal justices and Kennedy were so cohesive through all of the cases. Another factor we looked at is the Solicitor General's participation in these cases as amicus curiae. As you might guess, when the government takes a position, the Supreme Court is often in agreement of the Solicitor General's position, and that turned out to be 100% of the cases this term. Last term, it was 88% of the cases. The Solicitor General's position, by and large, was agreed with by the Supreme Court. So if you have this SG on your side, that's a great sign. Then we looked at something that other scholars have also looked at previously in other works, looking at the number of questions asked of an advocate during oral argument. The theory being that if you receive more questions as an advocate, you are more likely to lose that case. And it turns out this is a pretty strong correlation here in this context. 4 of the 5, that metric panned out. It gets a little bit complicated with the Solicitor General participation, because in 4 of the cases, the SG was actually an amicus for one of the parties on that party's side. And it gets a little bit complicated in terms of whether you should include those questions as the party's side question or not. But if you just look at the parties, the numbers support the theory that if you receive more questions, you're more likely to lose the case. So these are the 4 takeaway points. I won't go through all of them again. I did want to emphasize, in terms of the reversal rate, that the Federal Circuit continues to face sort of a rough terrain in the Supreme Court. Both of the Federal Circuit's decisions were vacated, and that's pretty similar to last year, in which I think 8 of them were vacated or reversed. The Ninth Circuit did very well. Judge McEwen mentioned, the Ninth Circuit's performance this past year in IP cases, perfect score, so A+ for the Ninth Circuit. Very briefly, looking at a few of the broader historical trends of IP cases in general before the Supreme Court, this current decade, just 4 years, has the most IP cases before the Supreme Court. You can see here this circled section with the median being above 5 cases, but as I'll talk about in a second, there are no IP cases on the docket for this current term, so this could go down, but currently we've had a lot of IP cases, especially since 2010. And a lot of this growth, uptick in the numbers, is attributable to patent cases, and that's why we had 3 today. Add that to the others within the past 5-6 years, patent cases have dominated the court's IP case docket, and that might be understandable because the Supreme Court is the only other appellate court that could hear patent appeals, so it might feel more of an obligation to get involved than in other areas of law, including copyright and trademark. As I mentioned, there are no IP cert petitions yet on the docket. In the next panel, they're going to go over some possibilities that are in the pipeline that might arise. And with that, I will turn it over to Dan.
Okay. All right, so I want to talk about forecasting, which is what I do. I'm a law professor, just started teaching here at Chicago Kent, and I've spent a lot of time building prediction models for a variety of topics across the spectrum in law, including billing analytics, all the way through to predicting case outcomes. I want to talk to you briefly give you some key takeaways from how one goes about predicting. The reference materials are in there. They're technical papers. If you want to really drill down to the center of the earth, this will remain a high-level conversation. Okay? So here's the thing. There are 3 known ways to predict something. This is across anything, whether we're predicting stocks or whether we're predicting Supreme Court decisions. Algorithms, experts, crowds, and algorithms. This is the only methods that exist across any prediction problem one could posit. And so in this context, we could pull some of the people in this room and who are, meet the traditional criteria of being an expert and take your view and benchmark you over time. Another thing that you can do, this is something we run with Josh Blackman, is this thing called Fantasy SCOTUS, which is we can build a crowd of individuals some of which have traditional expertise and some really who do not. In fact, the best player on our tournament over the last 5 years is an actuarial who's not a lawyer, who lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, who's 29 years old. He's the best known Supreme Court predictor that we've ever found. There's a new book coming out about what they call super forecasters, which are used by the DOD and CIA to do geopolitical forecasting, and they're always looking for somebody who doesn't meet the traditional criteria of expert but is good at forecasting. The last thing you can do is you can get an algorithm. So we've built a prediction model here, which is in this paper that you can read online. So I just want to say more generally that law is a field dominated by human expertise, and what we spent a lot of time on is saying that area is probably on its way out, and what we're moving into is an area where experts and algorithms and crowds have to work together to do forecasting. And so what we've seen across other prediction problems is that when you use an ensemble, a mixture of these 3 approaches, it beats any individual approach. So in Moneyball, which is a very popular presentation of these ideas, it's not, that's about predicting baseball players, who's going to be good and who's going to be bad. There's still scouts in baseball because the experts are still able to capture things that can't be captured in a statistical model. That said, experts have cognitive biases, they make mistakes, and so you can kind of get the best of both worlds by building these ensembles of experts, crowds, and algorithms. And that's really what we focused a lot on. The question, and the non-trivial question, is how does one assemble those sorts of mixtures, meta-ensembles is a term of art in the area, for particular problems, so that you don't have to exclusively rely on experts. So let me give you an example from political polling that's well known to most people, is Nate Silver, 538.com. So what is 538.com doing? Poll aggregation. Here's the insight. One poll has maybe they talk to 1,000 people, but there's 10 polling companies in a presidential election polling at a given day. So if I could aggregate those together, I could have the sample size of 10,000, which would give me incredible statistical power. The problem is not every pollster is equally good, okay? So this is really where the secret sauce is. How do I benchmark your performance over time and then grade you or weight you and say, well, you're a guy who really nails it? I mean, being a pollster, it's not about, being a homer. It's about getting it right. So the goal is to get closest to the number as possible. And you'll have to talk. We could talk if anybody wants online why certain things get grades or certain grades versus other grades here. I want to show you a visual version of how we're doing this in the judicial prediction context, which is the hard thing is what's the right weight over these three streams of intelligence? That's the actual question, not are experts better than the ensemble? They are not. The question is what's the right weight? If you want to have a sophisticated conversation about this. So what we want to do over time is benchmark people and their ability to actually forecast these things. And then try to mix across them optimally. That's the hard problem. So what we're doing with our algorithm gets about 70% of the cases right over the last 60 years using only information that's available before the time of the decision. It's not much of a trick to predict the future, knowing the future. The hard thing is to figure out that optimal weighting. So it could be that patent cases look like this. It could be they look like this. It could be they look like that. Now, we're doing this across all topics, not just patents. And so it's non-trivial to do across all these topics that the court hears. We do this for other things. We have this as a public display of what's possible, not because the Supreme Court is the most interesting thing. That's a very small number of cases, if you really think about it, across all the disputes in the world that lawyers are charged to deal with. It's a very small subset. Okay. Now, I'll leave you by just pointing this out to you, which is something we've recently released. Like, why might you care, independently of all the reasons that you're having the panel here today, which is you care about the content of those decisions. But you might also care because of this, which is these are tradable events. At least a subset of them are tradable. And so we just put this paper out about going back over the last 15 years and showing you can actually trade these cases. And this is such a poorly formed market. I just want to take a minute. This is Myriad Genetics, which should be familiar to most people in this room. The market traded this case the wrong direction for hours. Why did it trade it the wrong direction? Because it's a confusing case. If you think of what you got to know. You've got to know law, you've got to know finance, and you've got to know science. Well, that doesn't reside in a lot of people. People are usually experts in one of these things. And you have to understand how all this is going to project into a trading strategy. Meanwhile, the company's out there trying to tell you, well, it's really not that bad for us, blah, blah, blah. And so the market's basically trading this stock the wrong direction. People get back from lunch. The news reports are misreporting kind of, is this bad for Myriad? Is this good for Myriad? Come back after lunch, and then people sort of figure out what's going on and start moving, and the stock trades down. If you were to buy an option at the top when the stock is trading the opposite direction, you could have had a pretty good day, just suffice to say. So we just sort of show that across a wide range of topics that this is a phenomenon that goes on and on across it. So patent is one where we see lots of it, but it's not exclusively patent by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of topics that this comes up. So here's the Obamacare cases, the first round of Obamacare. Now that spike right there, that's Wolf Blitzer going on CNN and saying Obamacare is dead. So everybody who's executes a trade hits their button on their Bloomberg's terminal that second and trades the stock. Turns out he was wrong. So we just sort of show, this is a time series of how many of these events there are, these tradable events. These are non-trivial too. It's about $150 billion of market cap changes that take place across these companies. So let me just leave you with this. This to me is like the key of the paper. In most areas, and I have 30 seconds left, this is the key in this area for trading. Most areas are most of the arbitrage is gone at this point. In other words, if you were going to trade central bank announcements, if you were going to trade things like earnings announcements, you better be in right away, like within seconds, if not sub-second times. Here, 10 o'clock is the decision sometime a little bit after 10 o'clock. This is the end of the first day. This is the end of the second day. All that green you can think of as money left on the table. Because in any other area in finance, this stuff is gone. It goes to red instantaneously. So you see, and so some of the blue ones are instances where the stock is actually trading the incorrect direction. So if you want to look at more, here's my information. We have all the stuff online. We have the code that supports what we're doing online. We don't have the stock information because that's proprietary, but you can buy that stuff from Bloomberg or something like that. So anyway, I kept to my time as promised. You didn't think I could do it, but I did it. 7 minutes and 28 seconds.
Thank you, that's it.